Welcome to the ExecMBA podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share my recent conversation with Laura Bordoni. Laura is a member of the Darden faculty, and she leads the Experiential learning course in our Executive MBA program. Laura and I recently connected to talk more about her background, the Experiential learning course, and so much more. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And as always, if this conversation is helpful for you, please like this episode and subscribe to the ExecMBA podcast so you never miss an update. And remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. And now, without further ado, here's my interview with Laura Bordoni. Laura, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Brett. Great to be here.
Great to have you back on the show. It's been a little while, but excited to have you here this morning. How are you doing? How's everything?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I'm happy to be back in a different capacity, and yeah, looking forward to chatting about it.
I was thinking about this. I think we could put a new pin in the map. I don't think we've interviewed anybody yet from upstate New York. New York City, yes. Upstate New York, not so much.
I'm so surprised to hear that, Brad. There's a lot of us up here just doing a lot of interesting things. So I'm happy to represent, though. It's been a really good move for us. But I also look forward to coming back to DC periodically to get my taste of civilization.
Yeah, it's been certainly a highlight for me. It's been great to see you around Sam's Family Grounds again. So for our listeners who may not have heard your episodes from way back, tell us a little bit more about you and your background.
Sure. So my name is Laura Bordoni, and I lead the Experiential learning course at Darden. I know we'll talk about that today. In terms of my background, I spent most of my career in a variety of consulting roles. I started out in healthcare, then I went back and got my MBA at Chicago Booth, and then went into management consulting for some time and internal consulting at Marriott. But I would say throughout my career, I also formally and informally sort of did a lot of coaching, advising, mentoring folks, and was always drawn to sort of thinking about people as the center of my work. So at both an organizational level, I did a lot of human capital consulting, but then I always found myself sort of gravitating towards working with the individuals on my team or, supporting recruiting efforts at the different companies I was at. So I, like many of us, went through some major life changes and decided my heart wasn't in business consulting anymore. And I really, like I said, wanted to kind of focus on people being the center of what I was doing. And in particular, I am really fascinated by folks who are going through kind of big transitions or life changes. So I joined Darden and sort of built out and led our student engagement and affairs office for a few years, helped get the team through COVID and just really sort of building out our executive MBA student support and then helping start to launch the part-time program as well. So that was an amazing experience. Did that for some time, went through another big life change of moving to upstate New York and did a little soul searching. I have a young, although not so young anymore, daughter, and ultimately decided I wanted to spend most of my time sort of in that teaching, coaching, advising space, helping students and folks as they're thinking about those big life questions. So that has led me here, and I know we'll talk more about it. But that's a little bit about my background. As you mentioned, I live in Ithaca, New York. I have a almost 7-year-old daughter, and my heart is still with Darden, even though we are a little bit of a Cornell family in other ways.
Well, it's great to have you back working with students again. You mentioned that you lead the Experiential learning course. Tell us a little bit more about what that course is.
Sure. So it's pretty unique, and I'm biased, but I think it's a pretty amazing course that Darden offers for the Executive MBA student. So essentially, it's the course that helps students practice the skill of learning through experience by applying it to their own individual goals. So what does that mean? Well, if you think about it, there are certain things you can learn in a book. There's many things you can learn, for example, at Darden through a case discussion where you're debating other folks, but some things you have to learn through experience. So when I do the course kickoff with students, I use sort of a silly example of my daughter learning how to ski jump. So when she was 5, she wanted to become a ski jumper. And, I couldn't have said, okay, here's the exact speed and angle at which you should go over this teeny tiny little jump. She had to learn through experience, right? She had to have her first attempt where she didn't make it over at all. And then her second attempt where she went way too fast and she fell, she had to kind of just feel it for herself. Um, but it's not just enough to have the experience, right? After each attempt, we sort of paused and we're like, okay, what happened in that time? Okay, what are we going to do differently? We watched other people go over jumps. I sort of helped her take in new information about, what was working, what wasn't. And so there's actual um, theory and research behind what's called this experiential learning model, where you have an experience, you pause, you reflect on that experience, kind of observe what happened, and then you what's called conceptualize it, which really just means you sort of put it into your worldview. Maybe you take in some new information to sort of further your thinking on the topic. And then you run experiments and you try new things and you develop a skill and see how what you take from that next experience. So it's this ongoing cycle. And Darden views that as a really critical way to learn. So beyond just, as I said, learning through a book, and that it's an actual skill that you can improve upon. So many of us are great in some aspects of our life to pause and think, okay, what's going on here? What worked? What didn't? And in other ways, we just are not in the habit of it. So, the other example I like to think about is you have, someone you're managing on your team and you just keep having check-ins that aren't great, right? And it can be very easy to sort of, you're busy, you're frustrated, you have the check-in, and then you move on with your day, and then it happens again, right? But if you get in this habit of afterwards sort of pausing and thinking through things, maybe you work with a coach on how to better manage people. Maybe you read a book, maybe you talk to colleagues, whatever it is, you try something new, and you're much more likely to kind of, see a different outcome. So we want our MBA students to practice that skill, and they're incredibly busy. They have other goals they came into this program wanting to work on. So we say, great, let's apply this experiential learning model and skill to your personal and professional goals. So it's a student-led, self-paced course where it's really design your own journey. And we can get into more specifics, but essentially students set up goals for themselves, and then they go out in the world and try to work on those goals and reflect as they go. So that's sort of the course in a nutshell.
I'd like to talk a little bit more in detail about the course. But I think one of the things that's really cool about the Executive MBA program is that you have essentially 7.5 credits that are focused on your career and professional development. If you count the 6 credits of experiential learning plus the 1.5 credits of the professional advancement course, I mean, it's a 60 credit program, and almost a sixth of it is devoted to career and professional development, which to me, that's really interesting. How do you see this fitting into the overall Executive MBA program, this experiential learning course?
Yeah, I again, I'm biased, but I do think it's pretty incredible. And the way I think about how it fits in is, as I said, you come to Darden obviously to learn a tremendous amount in your core classes and your electives, but as we've talked about, most students also came for some reason, some other professional reason, right? They're trying to make a switch, they're trying to climb in their organization, they want to start their own business. And so this course allows them to carve out time to work on those goals while they're also taking in so much of that other knowledge from their other classes. So to sort of give a little bit of a sense of how it fits in, it runs along the background of your courses, and we split it into 2 parts. So the first half runs along the sort of second half of your first year when you're still in your core classes. And this first half is much more focused on sort of your professional goals. And it's really meant to lay the groundwork for a lot of things that we see students work on in their second year. So as I mentioned, switching, climbing, whatever it may be, we often see students really kind of work on those goals in earnest more in their second year when they have a little bit more time, their feet are under them a little bit more. And so the goal here is practice this experiential learning model while you get sort of a baseline of, okay, whether it's gaining clarity on what do I want to work on professionally, whether it's just getting your ducks in a row, like updating your resume, updating your LinkedIn, thinking about what your job search strategy is going to be, or whether it's, figuring out, okay, how am I going to leverage Darden's Batten Institute for Entrepreneurship in my second year when I'm really ready to launch my business. So we try to give you sort of these basics in your first year. And in that portion, we're much more hands-on. It's much more tactical. We can talk about the specifics of it. But then in your second year, right when you start electives is when we say, okay, we're going to open this wide open for you. And you can work on any goal. And that's where you can also work on personal goals or professional goals. And we line that up with electives, again, because that's when students really have sort of full control over what they're focusing on. And we want this to be a place for them to complement those electives, to think through, what are the goals that they're working on outside of the class. So there's a lot less structure and you can kind of design your own journey. And then in the middle, right around the halfway point of the program, which I think is such nice timing, we have a workshop where students can take a minute and say, okay, what did I work on during my first year at Darden? Where am I against my goals? How do I feel? How did things go? Now let me pause and think about what do I want to get out of my second year at Darden? This program flies by. And so, if you don't sort of take a minute to think about where am I, it can get away from you. So we try to use this course as another moment to say, okay, why don't you pause and think about your goals, whether they're personal or professional. So yeah, it's sort of, we try to fit it in. Students are very busy, so we're always sort of adapting and thinking through how to best support folks. But we try to line it up sort of where you are in your overall academic journey as well.
Yeah, increasingly, we started to talk with prospective students that there are really kind of two distinct phases in the executive MBA program. You have the first year, which is very cohort-based, lockstep. Everybody's taking the same classes on the same schedule. And then the second year, when you're taking electives, where schedules can really vary depending upon where people are relative to the 60 credits required for graduation. Can also vary depending upon the electives that they choose. Different weeknight distance schedules depending upon elective choice. Also can have different weekend residency day schedules depending upon elective choice. So there's a lot more variety that comes in the second year. So it's interesting to hear you kind of talk about how you work with first year students and how you think about transitioning into the second year, because again, increasingly we started thinking about the kind of two phases in the executive MBA program.
Yeah, it really does feel different. I think that's right. And we can talk more specifics, but I think it's also nice. We try to, through the experiential learning course, have opportunities for students to sort of work in small groups with one another, because as you said, the schedules are different, it just feels a little bit different. And so, leveraging this course to also really kind of continue to strengthen those relationships with classmates can be nice too. But yeah.
Yeah, the other thing that you said that really resonates, I know this is hard for our prospective students to appreciate, because when you're looking at it from the outside, it's like, oh gosh, 21 months, almost 2 years. That sounds like a long time. But there's a momentum you pick up as you go through the program. You're just going from quarter to quarter to quarter. You don't have extended breaks. And so, to your point, it can be hard to find some time to reflect on what you're doing and to have that space, because you're getting new classes every couple of months and life is still happening and work is still happening. So all of these things, a lot of motion here. And so it's nice to have this time carved out for students to have some time to reflect and think, because it can be harder to do when things are moving so quickly.
Yeah, agreed.
So let's talk about the course just generally. Like at the end of the day, somebody goes to experiential learning course. What do you hope they get out of it? One of the students, what are your goals for the course?
Yeah, I would say, I think in general, my goals for it are probably threefold. The first is, as I mentioned, just practicing this idea of learning from experience. I hope that students walk away recognizing how much power there is in applying that to all aspects of your life, that habit of pausing and reflecting after you have some sort of experience. Because we've all been there, right? Where you feel like you're banging your head against a wall and you keep wanting a change. You keep wanting to make it to the gym in the morning and you're just not doing it. And you're like, I will just apply more willpower to this or whatever the example is, right? And it's just not happening. But I really believe that if we are more deliberate and intentional about our actions and reflecting, that it can be really transformational for students to get in that habit. And I've seen, there's a lot of students who kind of sometimes are a little bit skeptical at first of like, am I going to be like writing diary entries? And I'm like, just suspend sort of that intellectual thought for a minute and try it. And I think folks find a ton of value. And reflecting can mean anything. It can be journaling, it can be meditating, it can be thinking about things when you're going for a run. It looks different for everyone, but just getting in that habit, I think, can be really valuable. Second, I want students to have time to carve out to work on their professional goals. So they have these broader goals we've talked about. And my hope is that they're able to make progress against those on their own timeline, what works for them, and have support along the way. So I work really closely with the career services team, with our Batten Institute for Entrepreneurship. We bring in executive coaches. So really, I hope students walk away from the course feeling like, wow, I was able to make progress on things that are really important to me, but they're maybe not as urgent as, the homework I have due or my family dinner that I'm trying to complete or my work. So carving out that time. And then third, where I get really excited is trying to help students think about sort of the whole person and how various aspects of their life fit together. And so if you let it, this course, I think, can give you a chance to ask some of those bigger questions of how am I feeling about, where I am? How is my balance? What are the things I really want to make progress on? Maybe even bigger if for some, if you want to, what do I want my life to look and feel like? Because I'd argue, even folks who say, no, I'm just going to work on career goals. That's great. It makes total sense. But, your career choices don't exist in a vacuum, right? And they impact your personal life and vice versa. So just giving students a space to think about sort of their whole self. I think one of my favorite quotes from a student was, EL gave me the time and space to dream again, which, if that's as good as you can get, in my opinion. But for some people, it's very tactical. For some people, they get in, they update their resume, they make their job search plan, they network, and they practice their interviewing, and they land a new job. Fantastic. If it's a tactical approach, great. This still gives you that time. But if I can help you just a tiny bit in thinking about yourself, overall. The course, I try to make sure the course sort of meets each student where they are, if that makes sense. But yeah, so I would say those are sort of the big goals of the course for me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One of the things when I first came to Darden, one of the things that I was really struck by, I've talked with some current students, and as I was sort of thinking about whether I was going to come work with the Executive MBA program, and I was curious about their responses to like what's been the impact of the program for them. What have they gotten out of the program? These are all Executive MBA students, by the way. And to a person, they were saying that they felt like the program made them a better person, that they became a better listener, a better communicator, they're more self-aware, more mindful. And I think of that as a product of the goals and intentions of the program, right? The goal is to help transform students. It's not a small goal, certainly. That takes a lot. It requires challenge, requires rigor, requires getting students outside their comfort zone, but it also requires making space for the work that you're doing as well, sort of getting students to think not just about accounting and finance and all this, but what it means to be a leader and a whole person, because that's what will really help you be an effective leader in an organization.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there's that bigger picture, and you really can't separate out all these pieces of what you're bringing into work and how you're interacting with the people that you work with. And so, yeah, I love to hear that. And I think even every student gets there and on a different journey and comes in a different place. But I do find most students at the end of the journey sort of have some sort of bigger reaction to it, as you mentioned, or some realization about themselves that they hadn't found there that they can then apply to going out and being a leader in their organization.
The other thing I think about a lot is what will make for an effective leader. If you think about the kinds of roles students will have after an executive MBA program, for example, they're not likely to be the specialist in the room. They're likely to be leading a team or working with others or having to influence others. Self-awareness goes a long way, and that's born out of reflection and having time to sort of think about who you are and what your blind spots may be, how people react to you, all of those kinds of things. You only get to that point though by spending time.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And really kind of forcing yourself, as we've talked about, to reflect and to dig into some of, how you're feeling. And a lot of students work with leadership coaches in addition to sort of the Darden team that we have. And a lot of that work ends up being sort of that self-exploration of, okay, I want to get a new job. Well, why is that? What's underlying that? Or, oh, I'm really drawn to X, or I'm really struggling with this particular issue at work. So it's professional, but again, yeah, it's getting to that sort of, what are my strengths? What are my blind spots? What are my gifts that I can bring? What are my values, and how does all that kind of fit into, to my next steps or what I'm working on?
You mentioned this course is kind of self-paced, choose your own adventure in some ways. Are there a few activities that stand out to you as like, oh, these are some things I really, really enjoy about the course, or that you think are fairly reflective? You mentioned the sort of midpoint kind of check-in, but are there other things that students have done or do that seem to really resonate or appeal to students, or that are always popular? Just kind of trying to get a sense a little bit more specifically about some of the programming that's available.
Yeah, absolutely. So it does run the gamut. I think that some of the highlights, as I mentioned, the leadership coaching, I think is a pretty big highlight. So students, we have obviously our amazing career services team and our Batten team, and myself, who all, are part of the Darden ecosystem and provide coaching and advising. As part of EL, those students get access to a number of sessions with external executive coaches. And this is where you can really dig into some of as I mentioned, some of these more behavioral questions, less of the tactical. And I would say that's where I see a lot of transformation for students. It's a pretty amazing resource and definitely a highlight. Other highlights, we have an entrepreneurship and innovation module, so students can work on their startup through experiential learning. Or I also see students who show up to the first session, and they're like, I don't know if I have an idea. But lo and behold, the more they talk, they connect with some classmates who have similar interests. And then the next thing you know, they're off and running. And so the entrepreneurship and innovation module in the first half has actual live content sessions where we're talking about what is an effectual ask, and what are the Darden electives that you can take to support your entrepreneurship journey. And so we have live sessions with the folks, professors and other folks from the Batten team. So that's a highlight. I think that, and then there's a whole suite of pretty tactical activities that are offered in the first half of the course around career transition. So we have updating your resume and LinkedIn, creating a good job search strategy, practicing your interviewing skills, working out what your story is. And what is nice about those, and I think is often helpful for students, is that the career team will deliver some content of, okay, here's how we think about it, building out a job search strategy or a great interview. But then the course also builds in a lot of actual tactical hands-on practice. So you'll show up and a group of your peers will be in a session, and you'll all practice interviewing live together, and with, folks providing feedback as well. So I think that's been a highlight as well, of the sort of more structured modules, is this combination of, we're going to help talk through sort of best practices around whatever this item is that this skill you're trying to improve upon, but then you're also going to get real experience and practice in the session. And then in the second half of the course, where we don't have as many live activities and modules, I think what a highlight has been, so students can choose any goal they want, really, but I would say some highlights that I've seen are students really start to work together on particular goals, and we facilitate that a bit, but you have to have sort of an accountability partner and someone who's checking in with you. And that's where I see everything from, last year, a group of students decided to run a 5K together, because in the second half, you can work on personal goals if that's what's most important in this moment for you. We had students who started an Atomic Habits book club because they were all trying to make habit change, and it's hard. We had students, as I said, who were partnering to work on a startup together, students who were trying to learn a new language. We had a public speaking student group. So it's really, I think what's neat about the second half is that it is so student led, but there's this container that gives you sort of the space and the requirement to say, I'm going to really work on this goal that I have, and I'm going to find classmates to help keep me accountable. And then I have reflection papers due every month to talk through how are things going, and it forces this, this growth and reflection. So yeah, I mean, there's others out there, but those are some highlights. We also bring in Darden executives, or excuse me, executives who are Darden alums for networking conversations. So there's a lot of good stuff, I think.
That's awesome. I didn't know about the small groups that work together. That's and obviously those are all student generated, student led, which is, I mean, that's great to hear. I also think one of the things people sometimes think about when they look at an executive MBA program is, oh, well, it must just be transactional. People just must be here to get a degree and kind of move on. I think there are a lot of examples that this program is not that way. That's a good example. Those groups with small groups of students working together on these sort of shared interests and shared goals. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. I mean, I usually have some starter ideas, and like I'll create a group of everyone who's looking to go through a job search, everyone who's looking to start a business. So some obvious big groups, but then it's pretty amazing to see what students come up with. I mean, there was a group of students who their personal goal was to get back to a place where they were doing something restorative for themselves every day. And three of them decided that meant they were going to all read Harry Potter together. And I find that to be incredible. And, for those of you who are sort of thinking, is this a real course? Is this really, I'm going to read Harry Potter through this course? There is such value again in making time for something like that. And I will say most students I find in the second half of the course are working on professional and personal goals. So typically I see someone say, okay, I'm working on my job search strategy. And I also really want to try to put my phone away for 2 hours a day during family dinner. So they're working on these goals that sort of often intertwine with one another. They're one often complements the other. Like, okay, I want to try to exercise again. Wow, that's given me more energy. I'm more effective at work. Now I'm more present with my family. It's building on things. But it is a mixture of things. But it's pretty neat to see what students decide to work on and how we can then be helpful. So a lot of times the students say, okay, we're going to start a small working group on, public speaking or on, interviewing prep. I'll often help them pull in whether it's a faculty member or someone from the career team or Batten if they need it or want it to say, okay, here's some other ideas. Or here's, a Darden resource that you can leverage as you work on these goals.
Yeah, to your point, that's pretty far away from finance and accounting and decision analysis. Some of these things that we hear students say, oh, this is why I want to go to business school. I need to get better in these areas. When you're thinking about what restores you personally, it's maybe a little softer than that. May not necessarily be what people immediately think about when they think about a business school experience, but also very, very important in terms of your professional and personal growth. So that's great to hear. Laura, I'm curious, anything new with this year's course that you're excited about? Or, I know this has obviously been the version of the course for a couple of years now, but I'm sure y'all continue to iterate on things. Anything new that you would want to highlight here?
We do. It is definitely a course because so much of it is about supporting students on their journey that tends to evolve year to year to meet the needs of the students. So this year we have a new module that the career team is offering called Professional Assessment and Planning. And in this module, students have the opportunity to do a mini 360 evaluation. So they can either send out themselves or through Darden a feedback request to 5 different individuals that they work with. And then they'll gather that feedback. And the Darden team is bringing in sort of an outside expert to talk through how do you best digest feedback? How do you make sure that, you focus on playing to your strengths and not, not kind of getting caught up in anything that negative that comes in. And then where do you go with that feedback? What do you do with it? How do you absorb it? So I think some students will go through that process on their own or with the career team. I think others will potentially work with a leadership coach. So I'm excited to see what the reception is. One of the things that we're conscious of, especially in the first half where the course is really about your professional goals, is making sure we have something for everyone. And so for the folks who are not switching right now, or they're not starting a business, or they're really not sure kind of what their professional goals are, we wanted to offer something to those folks beyond just coaching to say, okay, I'd like to kind of figure out what my strengths are, and wherever direction I'm going with that, whether it's climbing, switching, but let me do this mini assessment. So I think that'll be interesting to see how that session goes. And then I would say one of the other changes we made, we did this last year, but I'm always kind of evaluating how things are going. That we spread out the first half of the course a little bit more. It is a busy time when students are going through core, and so we want to make sure that folks have the time to participate in the activities and work on their goals. And so we've spread it out over a little bit longer of a period of time to hopefully help manage that too. So.
Well, the other thing that I think is really cool about this, when we talk with prospective students who are interested in making a career transition, in the Executive MBA program, there's no internship as part of this process. And it's true that you have to be self-directed as you go through this process of exploring, kind of thinking about what you want to do, and then, of course, applying for jobs. You have a career team to support you. You have all kinds of resources available to you, but it takes the step of a student actually tapping into those resources, leveraging those resources. And one of the hard things that is true for executive MBA students is you only have so much time. You have work and life and school, all these competing interests. And then, of course, if you add a career search or a job transition into that, that also takes time. And I think one of the things that's nice here at Darden is that you have built into the curriculum, credit-bearing courses where you get credit for engaging with this thing that likely drove you or led you to business school in the first place. It's not purely extracurricular. It's actually a curricular activity. And it can be really nice if you're a busy executive MBA student.
That's right. I think that, yeah, I think when you ask students, what the biggest value is, of course, I hope that all of the resources and the support that they get through experiential learning are really valuable. And I think it is exactly what you're pointing out, that I'm earning credit. And so it's this really important forcing mechanism for me to make the time and to be held accountable, because again, you're so busy that it's easy to say, okay, I really, really want to start my job search. And, it's hard to stick with that. But if you have, a reflection paper due in 2 weeks, you're like, okay, I got to make some progress. And I'm not grading students on how many networking conversations did you have. I'm grading them on, did you go out? Did you try things? Did you learn? Have you thought through what's next? And it still is an accountability forcing mechanism. So I agree. I think it's pretty unique and can be quite helpful for students.
Yeah, to me, that's one of the great things about where the professional advancement course now falls in the curriculum. It's basically between the fall and spring semester in January. It's in the January term, the short 10-day term between the fall and spring semester. And it used to be in quarter one. We moved it up to quarter one. And I think almost a little too early for a lot of people because they were just trying to get used to being in school and how does all this work, and maybe felt a little bit overwhelmed. But I think now they're a couple quarters in, and a little bit more settled. Maybe they've had some career conversations. They've been thinking about things, but I think it comes around at a good time. And I imagine a lot of that course also sets the table for what you're doing in experiential learning, that there's a very real nexus between professional advancement course and experiential learning course.
That's right. I'm glad you brought up the professional advancement course, because it's this similar idea of you're going to earn credit while you think about your career goals. And so they do very much build on each other. So as you said, yeah, I think the flow is nice where the beginning of the program, just get your feet under you. Then you have the professional advancement course. And then we've built in a little bit of a gap in between for folks to sort of either, catch their breath or sometimes need to put something on a shelf and revisit it. And then you run through experiential learning and it does build on it, where I think the professional advancement course, I think the career team would say is maybe one layer up of thinking through kind of your path. Then you get to experiential learning and you can dig in and get a little bit more tactical in terms of what you want to do next and how you're going to actually now execute the things you thought about in the professional advancement course. And then we run through basically until December of your second year. And then the sort of that last Q9 and Q10 of the program, we find that students are now off and running on, they've laid the groundwork, they're off and running, or, their mind is they're elsewhere. They're jamming in every last elective or global trip they can. But I find that a lot of students continue to work on the goals that they've set out throughout the course and experiential learning, sort of past that point. A lot of students they go through 3 EL learning cycles, if you will. And a lot of them sort of say, I'm designing my 4th EL learning cycle that I'm going to work on my own after the course ends to kind of keep my momentum, which is cool to see.
Well, two last questions for you, Laura. Anything you're looking forward to in the months ahead? Anything you're excited about? I know we'll get you down here in Roslyn maybe a few more times, but anything you're looking forward to?
Gosh, I'm looking forward to, we just kicked off the course and every cohort is so different. And I really love getting to know students and sort of learning what they're going to be focusing on, what they're thinking about. So the action plans, students start out the course by writing an action plan. Those are due April 6th. And that's just an exciting time for me to get to hear what students are thinking about. It's such a privilege for me to be sort of on the receiving end of folks thinking through their goals and how I can hopefully be helpful. And so I'm excited about that. Yeah, I'll be back down there for Q4.2 and then here and there in Q5 and Q6 as well. And yeah, just excited to see where students take things this year. And we have our first couple of EL sessions. So on April 7th, the Batten team will kick off our entrepreneurship module. And they'll talk about, as I said, students for the very first time will get to practice their pitch live in front of classmates. And then I think the next night we have sort of a resume overview session. So yeah, just a lot of good stuff. We're at the very beginning here. So it's an exciting time for the course. And I'm excited for spring to show up in a real way up here, but probably not for at least another couple weeks.
Yeah, such is the burden of living in Ithaca. Spring probably doesn't start till what, April, May, maybe?
Yeah. I remember when we first moved up here, my daughter's birthday is at the end of April. And I was like, asking about outdoor birthday party options. And everyone was like, ooh, I don't know. And April's risky. It's like, what do you mean it's risky? So, but we make the most of it. As you've heard, we do, we ski in the winter and we cherish the warm weather that much more.
I appreciate you mentioning the Batten Institute. We get that question from a lot of prospective students who have entrepreneurial interests or just interested in exploring entrepreneurship a little bit more. The fact that they're now so integrated in the experiential learning course. And of course, you also see students with these kind of venture ideas go on to participate in the UVA Entrepreneurship Cup, or E-Cup as it's known. There's 3 distinct phases of that that you can participate in, all sorts of things. You could apply to be in the iLab, for example, if that's something that's of interest to you. There's lots of different resources you can leverage, but it's great to hear that even if you're sort of just got a kernel of an idea, something that you want to engage with, there's opportunity in the experiential learning course to engage with that team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my favorite success stories, and I won't attribute to the success to experiential learning, but I certainly got to observe it, was one of our students who was a finalist in one of the E-Cup competitions through Darden last year and received seed funding. And she used experiential learning to sort of make progress on her startup at first to, find classmates who she could interview, work with, partner, and then get some hands-on support from the Batten team. And then also kind of help figure out how she was going to leverage the electives as well. And she's off and running with her company, and it's really exciting to see. So yeah, there's it puts some structure again around folks who want to go down that path. And I think a lot of folks say it's just a helpful way to kind of shift into being more action oriented. So yeah.
Yeah, because the idea of like launching your own venture can sound very intimidating and like where do you get started? And it's great for those of you who don't know as much about Darden, the entrepreneurship approach that's sort of promoted here is effectuation, which is a great easy sort of way to approach entrepreneurship, something that you might sort of think is consigned to unicorn companies somewhere out in California, but it's not. Lots of people do entrepreneurship all the time, and it's an easy way to get started and sort of test some hypotheses, some ideas that you have along the way. All right, last question. Laura, what's a piece of advice that you have for our prospective student listeners, something you would encourage them to think about as they consider their own MBA journeys?
It's a great question. I would say if you're still thinking through where you might want to get your MBA, I think you're doing the right thing by listening to this conversation, taking in as much as you possibly can. I think getting to know each school, visiting, talking to students, talking to other prospective students, even who, would be in your cohort, and just sort of, thinking through what feels right to you. Make all the pros and cons lists in the world, but also check in with, how do you feel about certain things just from an emotional standpoint. So I think taking in as much as you can. And then other than that, take a vacation before the program starts, maybe. I know it's hard. You're saving your days, which you should and you need to. I get that. But I would say you can take a long weekend where you do no Darden prep, no podcasts, no Brett Twitty in your ear, no work, just whatever is restorative for you, whether that's being with loved ones, whether that's, going for a long run, reading Harry Potter, whatever it is. I really do recommend folks just take a minute before they dive in.
Now that's important because as we talked about earlier, once you get started, the train has left the station. Like your destination is in 21 months and there's no real downtime. You might have a couple of weeks in December. I think that's about the longest break that students have. There's small ways to kind of carve out some time for yourself, during the exam periods. Once you knock out your exams, you have any days left in the period. You obviously have no school at that time, so a little bit of downtime. You're not traveling during a global residency travel period. You would have a break then, but we're not talking about extended breaks, right? So giving yourself some time to rest and be excited about what's to come, but also recognize you want to arrive in Charlottesville in August, well rested, excited, ready to go. I think it's important to give yourself that time and space. So, well, Laura, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure talking with you and so excited about all the things happening with the Experiential Learning course.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. I appreciate the opportunity. Hopefully you can tell I'm pretty passionate about it, and I hope it's something that brings a lot of value to our students. So thank you for the opportunity to chat about it.
And that was my interview with Laura Bordoni, a member of the Darden faculty. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at exec, that's ExecMBA at darden.virginia.edu. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.